Martha woke up earlier than usual that morning. The light from the half-open blinds spilled across her quiet kitchen, glinting off the polished counter she'd cleaned the night before. For a few seconds, she sat still, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, thinking about the strange conversation she'd had with her son Daniel the night before. His words echoed in her head, soft but weighty words that carried something she couldn't quite define. It wasn't about money or help or duty. It was something deeper, more personal. Daniel had driven all the way from Boston to her small home in Vermont, saying he just wanted to check in. But the way he'd lingered in the doorway, the way his eyes had searched hers, it wasn't a simple visit. There had been hesitation in his voice, the kind that came before a truth long buried. As Martha stared out the window, she tried to brush away the unease. Her son was kind, responsible, and often too thoughtful for his own good. Maybe she was just overthinking it. Still, there was a tenderness in his tone last night that stirred something in her heart, something she hadn't felt in years. When the doorbell rang, Martha's heart gave a small jolt. She wasn't expecting anyone. But when she opened the door, Daniel stood there again, holding a small paper bag and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I brought breakfast," he said simply. They sat at the table, the same one that had seen birthdays, arguments, and long silences over the years. As Daniel poured the orange juice, Martha noticed how his hands trembled slightly. He was nervous, she could tell. "Mom," he began, setting his cup down, "I've been thinking a lot lately. About you. About us." Martha blinked. "About us?" He nodded, his voice low. "You've spent your whole life taking care of me, of everyone. You worked 2 jobs after Dad left, made sure I never went without. You've given everything, but—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Who's been taking care of you?" Martha's throat tightened. She wasn't expecting the question, and it hit her harder than she wanted to admit. "I'm fine, Daniel. I always have been." He smiled faintly. "That's what you always say. But I see it, Mom. The loneliness. The quiet." He took a slow breath. "That's why I came here. I want to make you an offer, something different. I want you to come live with me in Boston." Martha froze, the words hanging in the air. "Live with you?" "Yes," he said gently. "You've done enough. You shouldn't be alone anymore. You can stay in my apartment. I'll handle everything, bills, food, everything. You just need to be happy again." She stared at him, her heart pounding with a mix of confusion and warmth. It was the kindest thing anyone had offered her in years, and yet something about it felt strange. "Daniel, that's very sweet, but I don't want to be a burden." "You wouldn't be," he said quickly. "It's not charity. It's family. I want you close. I miss you." There was an earnestness in his eyes, the kind that made Martha's chest ache. He looked so much like his father in moments like this, that same quiet determination, that same stubborn love. She felt torn between gratitude and a deep, inexplicable sadness as the morning sunlight touched her silver hair. Martha realized how long it had been since someone had looked at her that way, with care, with warmth, with meaning. Not as a mother, not as an aging woman, but as a person whose happiness still mattered. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to decide now. Just think about it, okay?" Martha nodded slowly. "Okay, double quotes, after breakfast." They took a walk around the small lake near her home. The wind was soft, the air cool, and the leaves had started turning shades of amber and red. Daniel talked about his work, his apartment, and how he'd rearranged things to make room for her. Martha listened quietly, smiling, though 1,000 thoughts swirled inside her. Could she really leave behind the home she'd built? The place that held every memory, every photograph, every echo of laughter and loss. That night, when Daniel left, Martha stood by the window watching his car disappear down the winding road. The house felt heavier than usual, filled with silence that pressed against her chest. She walked through each room, the living room where she had taught Daniel to dance as a boy, the kitchen where she'd cried quietly after her divorce, the porch where she'd watched countless sunsets alone. Every wall carried a story, every corner a whisper of her life. And now her son wanted her to leave it behind. The next morning, she found a note on the table. Daniel had written it before he left. "Mom, I'll call you soon. Please think about what I said. You deserve more than quiet mornings and lonely nights. Let me be there for you the way you were always there for me." Martha folded the note carefully and placed it beside her coffee cup. The words lingered like a melody she couldn't shake. That day passed slowly. She cleaned, watered the plants, and sat in the garden, lost in thought. Her heart felt heavy yet alive, as if something had been stirred awake after a long sleep in the evening. She opened an old photo album, flipping through pictures of Daniel as a boy. His smile, his laughter, the way he'd always clung to her hand. It all came rushing back. He wasn't just offering her comfort. He was offering her connection, and yet deep down she felt something else too, a sense of guilt. Was she being selfish for hesitating? Or was it wrong to want a life of her own, even at 60? The phone rang, startling her. It was Daniel again. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Mom, I just wanted to say, thank you for listening yesterday. I know it's a lot." "It is," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I just don't want you to be alone anymore," he said quietly. "I keep thinking about how much you gave up for me. You've always put everyone first. Maybe it's time someone puts you first." Okay. Those words, "put you first," sank deep into her heart after they hung up. Martha sat for a long time thinking about her life, her choices, and the strange turn of fate that brought her here. She knew Daniel's offer came from love, pure, genuine love, but it also reminded her how fragile life was, how the people we raise eventually turn around and try to give back the same love we once gave them. As she stood by the window that night, watching the stars, she whispered softly, "Maybe it's time." The moonlight washed over her face, gentle and pale. For the first time in years, Martha didn't feel invisible. She wasn't ready to decide. Not yet. But she knew one thing for certain. Her son's offer had opened a door inside her heart that had been locked for far too long. And behind that door was something she hadn't felt in years. Hope? Days passed, but Martha couldn't shake Daniel's words from her mind. Every morning she found herself replaying that moment. His eyes filled with quiet concern, his voice gentle but steady as he offered her a new beginning. The idea of leaving her home, her memories, her independence, it scared her. Yet the warmth behind her son's gesture had touched a place deep inside her heart. It reminded her that she was still seen, still loved, still needed. The week moved slowly. Martha went about her daily routines, tending to her garden, feeding the birds, baking her favorite bread, but everything felt different. The silence of her small Vermont house wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy. Each corner seemed to whisper Daniel's words back to her. "You deserve more than quiet mornings and lonely nights." That Thursday, she received a small package in the mail. When she opened it, she found a framed photograph of her and Daniel from years ago when he'd graduated from college. They were both smiling, their arms around each other, the sun bright behind them. There was also a note, "No matter where you are, you'll never be alone. But I hope one day this picture can hang in the same home again, ours." Martha felt tears sting her eyes. Daniel wasn't just being kind. He was reaching out with love, a love that asked for closeness, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. She wiped her eyes and whispered, "Oh, Daniel." That night as she sat by the fireplace, she remembered the years that had slipped by so quietly. The years she had worked late, eating dinner alone after Daniel moved out. The birthdays spent with polite phone calls instead of laughter around the table. She realized how much distance had built up between them, not by choice, but by the natural pull of life. And now, here was her son, trying to close that distance again. The next morning, she called him. He answered immediately. "Mom, I was just thinking about you," he said, his voice bright. "I got your package," she said softly. "It was beautiful." "I hoped you'd like it," he replied. "Did it make you think about my offer?" There was a pause. Martha's hand tightened on the phone. "It did," she admitted. "But it's not an easy decision, Daniel. This home. It's a part of me." I understand, he said quietly, but I also know that homes can change. What matters is who you share them with. His words hit her heart like a quiet truth. Martha smiled faintly, even as her eyes filled with tears. You sound just like your father, she whispered. Daniel chuckled softly. He'd want you to be happy too, Mom. They talked for a while about small things, about memories, but beneath every word was an unspoken tenderness, a love that bridged the miles between them. After the call, Martha took a long walk through her backyard. The maple trees were shedding their last golden leaves, and the cool autumn air brushed against her face. She looked at her little house, the chipped paint, the old porch swing, the window boxes she'd built decades ago. Every inch of it carried her life's story. But maybe, she thought, it's time for a new chapter. A few days later, Daniel returned, just as the first snow began to fall. His car pulled into the driveway, the headlights cutting through the early evening light. Martha met him at the door, her heart fluttering with emotion she couldn't name. Hey, Mom, he said softly, brushing snow from his jacket. You came back, she said, smiling. I told you I would. They hugged, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. It was a hug that said everything words couldn't: love, gratitude, and a silent promise of togetherness. That night, over dinner, Daniel brought it up again, but gently. I didn't want to pressure you, he said, his tone careful. But I meant what I said. You'd always have a place with me. Martha looked across the table at her son. The boy she'd once held in her arms was now a man offering her a kind of care she never thought she'd need. She took a deep breath. I've been thinking about it a lot, she said. And maybe it's time for me to start over. I think I'd like to see what your city feels like. Daniel's face lit up. You mean it? She nodded, smiling. I do, but don't expect me to sit around all day doing nothing. I'll help in the kitchen, and I still like my morning walks. He laughed, the kind of laugh that filled the house with warmth again. Deal, Mom. Over the next few days, they packed up what she needed. Martha decided to leave most of her furniture behind, but she carefully boxed the things that meant the most: her photo albums, her favorite books, and the old wind chime Daniel had made her when he was 8. When it came time to leave, she stood in the doorway one last time, looking around the house that had been her world for so many years. She ran her hand along the wooden frame, feeling the grooves and marks time had carved. Goodbye, she whispered softly. Thank you for everything. The drive to Boston was long but peaceful. Daniel played her favorite old songs. They talked about everything from his childhood memories to her dreams of traveling someday. For the first time in years, Martha felt alive again, as though her life was no longer standing still. When they reached Daniel's apartment, he led her upstairs to a cozy guest room he had decorated just for her. The walls were painted a soft cream. The bedspread was new, and a vase of fresh lilies sat on the nightstand. Martha felt her throat tighten. You really did all this for me? Of course, he said. You deserve it. She smiled, unable to hold back her tears. You've grown into such a good man, Daniel. Your father would be proud. That night, Martha lay in bed listening to the sounds of the city, the faint hum of cars, the distant chatter, the rhythm of life moving just beyond the window. It was different, but it felt warm. She thought about how her son had come full circle from the boy who once needed her comfort to the man now offering her his. Weeks passed, and their days fell into a peaceful rhythm. They shared breakfast together, went for walks, and sometimes just sat quietly in the living room, reading side by side. Martha began to laugh again, real, unguarded laughter, and Daniel found himself smiling more too one evening. They were sitting on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker below. Martha turned to him and said, You know, when you first offered me this, I thought it was just kindness. But now I see. It was love. The kind that doesn't fade, even when everything else does. Daniel reached over and took her hand. You'll always have me, Mom. That's a promise. Martha nodded, her heart full. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, truly understood as the night deepened. She looked out at the skyline, tall buildings, glowing windows, endless stories, and realized her own wasn't over yet. It had simply turned a page. The memory of that offer, her son's quiet, heartfelt words, stayed with her forever. Not because it changed where she lived, but because it reminded her that love, in its purest form, doesn't have an age or a shape or a limit. It's simply the promise to be there and in that moment. Surrounded by light and laughter, Martha knew she had finally found peace, not just as a mother, but as a woman who was, at last, loved and understood. The next morning began with a quiet stillness that hung over everything. Rachel woke up before sunrise, the faint sound of city traffic echoing below her hotel window. Her suitcase was already packed, her coffee half finished, and yet her mind refused to settle. The bracelet Daniel had given her glinted softly on her wrist as she sat on the edge of the bed, replaying every word, every look from the night before. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something powerful, something she hadn't felt in years. She tried to shake it off. This was her boss. Her job mattered too much to let emotions blur the lines. Still, she couldn't ignore the warmth she felt when she thought of his kindness, his quiet attentiveness, and that gift that now carried more meaning than he might have realized. When she stepped into the hallway, she found Daniel waiting by the elevator, holding a cup of coffee for her. "Morning," he said with that easy smile that made him seem more human than the boss. "Morning," she replied, accepting the cup. "Thanks for this. Couldn't let my best assistant face the road without caffeine," he said lightly. But beneath the joke, there was a softness in his eyes that made her heart stir again. They checked out of the hotel and started the long drive back to Seattle. The first few miles passed in comfortable silence, broken only by the hum of the tires and the sound of the wind. Then, as the sun began to rise, Daniel said quietly, "You know, Rachel, yesterday made me realize something. I don't say thank you enough." She looked at him, surprised. "You do, actually. More than most people. Not enough to you," he said, glancing at her before turning his eyes back to the road. "You make everything work. You see details before anyone else does. You've built half this company without taking credit for it." Rachel felt her throat tighten, unsure how to respond. "That's kind of you to say." "It's true," he said softly. "And I don't want you to ever feel invisible." Those words landed deep, not because of what they said, but because of how he said them, like he truly saw her. Rachel turned her face toward the window, blinking back unexpected emotion. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the light golden and warm, and for a few moments they both sat in silence that said more than words could. Hours later, as they neared Seattle, Daniel's phone buzzed. He ignored it, focused on the drive. "That's probably Ethan," he muttered. "My son? He's been asking when I'll be back." Rachel smiled softly. "He must miss you. He's growing fast," Daniel said, his tone filled with pride. "Sometimes I think I'm missing too much of it. Work just takes over, you know?" She nodded, understanding all too well. "Yeah, life has a way of slipping by while we're busy being responsible." He gave her a small, knowing smile. "Exactly." When they reached the city, Daniel pulled up outside Rachel's apartment building. She unbuckled her seatbelt, hesitating before stepping out. The ride had felt longer, fuller somehow, as if something had quietly changed between them. Daniel got out too, walking around to help her with her suitcase, even though she insisted she could manage. As she reached for it, his hand brushed hers. The touch was brief, but enough to make both of them pause. "Thank you for everything, Rachel," he said. "Not just for the trip, for all of it. For being steady when everything else isn't." She smiled faintly, meeting his eyes. "That's my job, Daniel." He shook his head slowly. "No, that's who you are." The air between them grew quiet again. It wasn't awkward, just heavy with unspoken understanding. Then, as if remembering himself, Daniel stepped back and smiled. "Get some rest. You've earned it." "I will," she said softly. "And thank you for the bracelet. It really means a lot." "I'm glad," he replied, his eyes warm. "It suits you." Rachel stood there watching as he drove away, the sound of the engine fading into the city noise. When she finally went inside, she leaned against the door and exhaled. feeling something shift inside her. Not sadness exactly, but a deep, quiet ache. It wasn't about what was said or done. It was about what wasn't, the feelings that stayed behind, silent and tender. The days that followed slipped back into routine. Emails, meetings, deadlines. Daniel was the same, professional, kind, composed, but something unspoken now lingered in their exchanges. He'd glance at her during meetings just a moment longer than before. She'd notice when he smiled a little softer, or when his voice carried that hint of warmth that wasn't just about business. A week later, during a company meeting, Daniel announced the success of the project they'd presented on the trip. And, he said, looking straight at Rachel, none of this would have happened without Rachel's hard work. The room applauded, and Rachel felt her cheeks warm. She caught his eye for a second, and in that look, there was something like quiet pride, the kind that didn't need words. Later that day, as she was leaving the office, Daniel called out to her. "Hey, got a minute?" She turned, holding her bag. "Sure." He stepped closer, his tone lower, almost careful. "I wanted to ask if you're doing okay. You've been quieter since we got back." Rachel smiled lightly. "Just catching up on work. You know how it is." He nodded, but didn't look convinced. "If you ever need to talk about anything, you know you can." "I know," she said softly. "Thank you, Daniel." For a moment, it seemed like he might say more, but then he just smiled. That same warm, founded smile she'd come to admire, and stepped back. "Have a good evening, Rachel." "You too." As she walked to her car, the wind lifted her hair, and she touched the bracelet gently, tracing the small charm with her thumb. She realized that the gift wasn't just a token of thanks. It was a reminder of something deeper. That she was seen, valued, remembered. Weeks turned into months. Life continued. The pace of work, the meetings, the quiet coffee breaks where they exchanged small smiles but never crossed the line they both knew existed. Yet every so often, when Rachel caught sight of the bracelet, she felt that quiet warmth again. It wasn't love in the grand, dramatic sense. It was quieter, purer, built on respect, understanding, and something that would probably never be spoken aloud. But that didn't make it any less real. One evening, Daniel stopped by her desk before heading home. "I'm flying out tomorrow," he said. "New project. I'll be gone a few weeks." Rachel looked up from her screen. "Need me to prepare anything before you go?" He smiled. "Already done. I just wanted to say thank you again for everything you do, Rachel. You make my world a little steadier." Her heart caught at the softness in his tone. "You're welcome," she said simply. "And be safe." He nodded, hesitated for a heartbeat, then added quietly, "I'll miss our coffee breaks." She laughed gently. "I'll save your seat." When he left, the office felt emptier than usual. Rachel stood by the window, watching the sun dip below the skyline, feeling that same mixture of peace and longing she'd felt by the river that night. Some connections weren't meant to be defined. They were meant to be felt, carried quietly, like a secret melody only two hearts could hear in the days that followed. Rachel wore the bracelet every day, not as a reminder of a complicated feeling, but as a token of gratitude for kindness, respect, and the rare beauty of being truly seen. And somewhere miles away on another business trip, Daniel found himself checking his watch during a quiet coffee break, smiling faintly as he thought of her, the woman who changed the way he saw the world, not with words, but with her quiet strength and heart. Both of them knew things could never be more than what they were. But in that unspoken truth lay something pure, a connection built not on longing but on quiet appreciation. And sometimes that was enough.